All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. We had no games last night because of the presidential election here in the U.S. We'll not be discussing that in any capacity, but I do have the guys from Nerd Sesh, Logan and Carson, coming to join us for 5 big questions surrounding the NBA. We're going to talk a little bit about our top tier of contenders and whether or not we should be making any tweaks to that after the first few weeks of the season. We're going to talk about the 2 biggest surprises in the league, the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. I want to spend some time on the Phoenix Suns. They're a team that we haven't hit in the last few days, and they're off to an equally impressive start against a very tough schedule, thanks to some late game shot making from Kevin Durant. We're going to talk a little bit of Mavs, talk a little Lakers, and then the 2 biggest disappointments in the NBA, in my opinion, this season, the Milwaukee Bucks and the Denver Nuggets. So we're going to be bouncing all around the NBA. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with the top tier of contenders. So Carson and Logan, I started the season with 4 teams in my top tier. I had Boston, for obvious reasons, defending champ, incredibly dominant last year, even though they didn't really face much in the way of, adversity along the way. I think that they would have done well had they faced adversity, given the talent and the level of basketball that they were playing. And I think that they were just a shoe-in, right? Oklahoma City, add Hartenstein, add Caruso. They're kind of getting to that point where they're nearly as talented as Boston. You've got to include them. Denver, for me, was Jokic is the biggest matchup problem in the NBA, and then I thought people were a little low on them after everything that went down last year, basically them coming this close to making it to the Western Conference Finals despite a lot of stuff going against them. And then the New York Knicks, after trading for OG Anunoby at the tail end of last year, getting Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns in their super talented starting 5. But Boston and Oklahoma City have run away with things here early. I think they're, 13-1 or something like that to start the year. But the Knicks and the Nuggets, the Knicks are at 3-3, the Nuggets at 4-3, so both slow out the gate. Is it clear that there's a kind of a rift forming between those groups? Should we consider changing our top tier contender list to just Boston and Oklahoma City? Let's start with you, Carson. What do you think?
I do think so. And that's honestly where I've been at. I had OKC winning the title preseason. I was extremely, extremely high on their offseason and their natural improvement this year, just having such a young, rapidly ascending core. So I've basically viewed them and Boston as the 2 juggernauts. And I would have agreed with you that these were my top 4 teams preseason, but I think I would have already had a division in terms of tier between Boston and OKC. And then I viewed Denver as a team that was really, really good. I also thought people were underestimating, that had the potential to play spoiler versus a team like OKC because of the overwhelming Jokic factor as much as anything else. But I think that there is some pretty clear separation there. And the thing with OKC that is just so ridiculous is what they're doing defensively. I thought they would have the best defense in basketball. I think they do have the best defense in basketball and potentially one of the best that we've seen in a long time. They have a defensive rating under 94 after 7 games. They're forcing almost 21 turnovers per game. These are just comical numbers. And even through 7 games, the sample size is small, but that's still a relatively long period to hold up these sort of ridiculous, disgusting numbers. It's just one of the most disruptive defenses that we've seen in a long time. They have an all-world rim protector in Chet. They have the best perimeter defense in basketball around him. There's just ridiculous length and athleticism and activity and collective IQ all around him. And nothing is easy versus this team. You see it versus Jokic, right? When they don't have Hartenstein out there, so they have to double basically every touch. They make every catch hard, every rotation. They are smothering every nugget around Jokic when he is able to get the ball to an open player. That player's only open for a split second. What we've seen them do to great ball handlers like Trae Young, right? Forcing him into 10 turnovers. It's just absurd, the amount of chaos that they cause. And I legitimately think they have 4 all-defense caliber players. Chet is a no-brainer. Caruso, Lou Dort. I think Case and Wallace is playing at that level. I think that he is an absolute hound defensively. And maybe the craziest stat about their defense to start this year, they have a 91 defensive rating with Chet on the floor, which is incomprehensible, right? They also have a sub 98 defensive rating with him off the floor, and that's without Hartenstein, who's hurt, and that's without Jay Will. So they're doing those with 5 guard lineups, with lineups that don't have a big on the floor. They are just so ferocious. They force so many turnovers that teams can't score on them in those looks either. So That's really what is so remarkable to me about OKC. It is the defensive end of the floor, but it's also just that versatility and it's that depth in terms of the lethal defensive lineups they can play and the lethal offensive lineups they can play. Going two bigs with Hartenstein out there, going small with Chet at the 5. And Chet has taken a leap on offense, and that's another reason that I'm super high on this team. The production the last 3 games hasn't really been there. He's been in some foul trouble. He hasn't played too many minutes, but he clearly looks more confident as a driver. He just looks more aggressive out there offensively, and I think that he is probably like a top 20 player in basketball right now with what he's doing on the defensive end. And that's the other thing. Like, I think this OKC offense is just going to continue to look better. They're 19th in offensive rating right now, and they're still number 1 in net rating. I think that they have the talent to be a top 5 offense with all the athleticism and with all the playmaking and driving and shot creation they have on the floor. And I do think that with Hartenstein out there, they are more built for the physical battle of the playoffs, which was the big question last year. You have experience, but you also just have the slightness of that team struggling on the glass, right? Can they deal with some of these monsters in the post, like a Nikola Jokic, like Minnesota last year, which was just huge with their 2 bigs? I do think that they're better equipped to do that. And all the young guys are getting better. And when you look at Denver, when you look at New York, like, even if you don't think the sky is falling for those teams, which I don't, they are just way more flawed, right? The questions that we have fundamentally about New York on the defensive end, the questions that we have about Denver's depth, New York's depth as well, those to me just far surpass any question that I have about OKC, which I guess would just be like their 3-point volume and maybe their spacing when you are playing Hartenstein out there alongside Chet. But I just think they're too great defensively, and I still think they're too offensively skilled for that to really matter against anybody other than Boston.
I agree with both of you guys. I think Boston and Oklahoma City have separated themselves from the pack. And to add some context to some of those numbers that Carson was talking about, Oklahoma City is 7-0. They've held 5 of their 7 opponents to 95 or fewer points. Right now, as it stands, again, we're only through 7 games of the NBA season, so do with these numbers what you will. They have the number 2 defensive rating in NBA history. You have to go back to the 1970s to see a team with a lower mark. They're number 1 in defensive rating since 2000. The next 2 teams that you look at are the 2004 Pistons and the 2004 Spurs. It's just a completely different brand of basketball. Oklahoma City's also number 1 in stocks per game ever by an NBA team. That's steals and blocks per game. They're number 1 in steals per game of any team in NBA history. And the remarkable thing to me, guys, is that this team hasn't broken a sweat yet. It really hasn't seemed like the Thunder have been pushed or had to overexert themselves. So I do. It starts with this defense. And obviously, when we look back to what held them back in the playoffs last year, Chet's going to have to pull his weight offensively. He was under 16 points a night on 26% from deep. Jalen Williams has to pull his weight offensively as well. In the Mavericks series, he was 17 a night on 42% from the field. And the surrounding guys have to shoot well. Cason Wallace was at just 32%. Aaron Wiggins was at 30%. But I think those guys earned much needed playoff experience. Isaiah Hartenstein, as you mentioned, Carson, hasn't even played yet. Like, if you were telling me they were going to be putting up these numbers through 7 games, I would have thought he would have had to have been on the floor. And so I just find myself asking crazy questions about this team. I don't know if you guys feel like this. I've posed some questions to Carson in our text as the season has started. But, like, I find myself asking questions like, can this team win 70 games? Can SGA win MVP and Chet win Defensive Player of the Year? Like, could this be, maybe not this season, but eventually one of the greatest teams ever? I'm getting a little hyperbolic here, but I do. This team is, I'm stupidly high on Oklahoma City, and I do think they're in a tier by themselves with Boston.
So I think some of the big picture conversation surrounding like 70 games and some of the stuff surrounding their metrics, I think is a little premature just because they've played a really light schedule out the gates. Now, for the record, I think OKC is awesome, and I think they're going to do well against better teams. But the West, guys, the West and East, it's still 2 very different ball games here. Like, there are 10 teams that are above 500 so far. 8 of them are in the West. The West is 60-48 in head-to-head matchups with the Eastern Conference to start the season. That's about 3% in win percentage ahead of where it was even last year, when the West was 70 games over 500 against the East. So, like, there's just so many good teams night in and night out West that, like, Oklahoma City will drop games. I think they're going to run away with the 1 seed. I think that I mean, to get to the actual origin of the question, I am changing my top tier of contenders, and I usually don't do this sort of thing in less than 10 games. But there's obviously a lot that goes into it. These are two very complex basketball teams, and the teams that I'm dropping, Denver and New York, I do think will play better in the long run. New York is a new team. They're figuring some stuff out. Denver, just literally everyone's either banged up or not playing well, like other than Jokic. So that will just make a team look lesser than they are. So like I do think those teams will play better in the long run. But to me, Boston and Boston and Oklahoma City are very clearly on a separate tier from the rest of the league. They are the top tier of contenders that I look at right now. And the main singular piece that I want to focus on is this is every year in the NBA, I feel like I learn more about the game of basketball. It's one of my favorite things about the game. I feel like it's constantly changing and shifting. And like, even within that, there's like any one team that kind of finds a market inefficiency can jump through and win, kind of like Denver did 2 years ago. It's like, we don't shoot any threes and we don't necessarily have a good defensive anchor at center, but we're going to win the title, which was like super rare, right? Like the game is always shifting and changing. And one of the main things that really stood out to me over the course of the start of this season is that the game of basketball has shifted so much towards pacing and spacing and shooting, driving, kicking. Hell, damn near 20%, damn near 1/5 of these games is being played in transition at this point. Like literally a significant chunk of the game is up and down, flying up and down the court. So your ability to have speed on the floor, to cover ground in transition, to cover ground in rotation, to pressure the ball and contain the ball, flatten out drives, to win long rebound contests and 50-50 balls. That sort of thing to me is rising to the surface as one of the most important traits of a basketball team. And in addition to all of the things that Boston does extremely well, and in addition to all the things that Oklahoma City does extremely well, they're both just fast as shit. And they're both deep with players that can cover ground in transition, in rotation, that can get into the ball with pressure and make teams uncomfortable and fight them off of spots. And like when I look down the rest of the league, I think there are teams that can match that speed. Golden State is a team we're going to talk about that I think can match that speed on the perimeter. But those two teams are the only two teams that have that kind of all-encompassing trait that I think is so important while having the amount of firepower necessary to win 4 playoff rounds. Now, neither team is off to a perfect start. Boston's defense and even their transition defense hasn't been great to start the year, although they've been playing in a lot of blowouts. Oklahoma City, Shai and Jalen Williams are really working hard to increase their pull-up three-point shot volume, and they're experimenting with some stuff. Carson, I love the breakdown you gave on Chet. I agree. He's been one of the 20 best players I've watched to start the season. Again, we'll see. It's a small sample size. He's got to maintain it, but he's just hooping his ass off. There's no other way. There's no other way to put it. But to me, like Boston and Oklahoma City, they're separating themselves, and like I'm gonna have a really hard time at this point finding any reason to pick against either of them in their conferences. And I think we could be headed to a very, very exciting NBA Finals. The Emirates NBA Cup is here, and you can win big getting in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All 30 teams split into 6 groups every Tuesday and Friday, playing for the right to advance in the single elimination in-season tourney, culminating in the NBA Cup Championship in Vegas. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favored to win the NBA Cup at plus 370. The Oklahoma City Thunder have the second best odds at plus 600, and then the New York Knicks have the third best odds at plus 900. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, let's move on to our surprises. So the two biggest surprises in the NBA this year, the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, very different in the sense that the Cavs were already considered like kind of a middle of the pack Eastern Conference playoff team that is overachieving to the top of the conference. Golden State, I think, was a team that most people around the league were pretty low on for good reason coming out of last year. They were well below 500 against teams that were 500 or better last season. A couple of big pivotal must-win games at the end of the year against mediocre teams. They lost both of them. Steph didn't look like a top 10 player anymore. There was some weird politics stuff going on. Like, it just looked like a team that maybe wasn't even worth investing in terms of making a deal. And just moving Kuminga to the bench, getting Clay out of there, having everybody buy into roles. All of a sudden, they have this 13-man rotation. I think they nailed every single signing from the summer. And even with Steph barely contributing to this point in the season, they're kicking everybody's butt, albeit against a light schedule. So between the Warriors and the Cavs, and we'll start with you, Logan, which of those two teams do you think has more potential to actually compete for a championship this year?
I think it's the Cavaliers, and I got to go Nick Collison here. I got to put my hand up. The people that you were describing preseason about both of these teams, I'm in both. I did not expect the Warriors to be close to 500 this year. I thought they were going to hover around there, but I didn't think they were going to overachieve, especially with Steph Curry out. Like, this team has been really resilient. They've battled every night, and I think this entire team really complements one another. I do think they have a glaring flaw that could come back to bite them. I'll get into that in a minute, but I do think it's Cleveland, and it starts with Evan Mobley's leap. Carson just did a video yesterday on Evan Mobley, which you guys can find on the Nerd Sesh YouTube channel if you're interested. Full breakdown on the development he's had this year, but he's already one of the best defenders on the planet. The Cavs are 9.4 points per 100 possessions better with Mobley. It's a difference between a defensive rating of 104.7 and 114.1. Mobley's been doing this. Carson called him the best defensive prospect he had ever evaluated at the time of the draft. He's always been really transformative on that end, and you could see that he was going to be really impactful there, but it's really about the offensive leap. First, Mobley's been a problem in transition. He's an 81st percentile transition scorer, and he can do it in both ways. Either if he's trailing the ball handler and just running the floor when you feed your big man, right? He's a problem there, getting up and down with Garland and Mitchell. But he's also handling in transition, which is crazy. There was a play in the Milwaukee game where he gets a block at the rim, gets the ball at about the 3/4 line of the court, takes 4 dribbles, and is at the rim dunking it. Like, it's just insane stuff. Like that he can do that. But he's initiating from the perimeter. He's taking and shooting more confidently than ever. He's taking 2 threes a game. I know that's not a lot, but it's an improvement for Mobley. And again, he's taking them confidently. You're watching Mobley take floaters, post hooks. He's being more aggressive and more willing as a roll man. Like, and I want to be clear about something. The touch and the footwork are very much still a work in progress. You can see that game to game with Mobley, but he's getting and manufacturing high quality looks at such a high level. He just makes it look easy. It's not really about him getting to the looks. It's about Mobley making them. And so if he can cross over that barrier, I think there's even another leap that Mobley could, tap into, where you're looking at this guy potentially as maybe I think a 22 or 23 point per game scorer, and that's really deadly. But it's really about how he unlocks the rest of this team around him, because for the longest time, for years now, Carson and I have been talking about the dynamic and the fit with having 2 offensive-oriented guards in Garland and Mitchell, and then 2 very limited offensive players in Mobley and Allen. If Mobley can make this a legitimate leap, him and Allen can coexist and complement one another, and they can have a great defense alongside them. Garland also has returned to form. He was dealing with a broken jaw last year. He looks like he's come back in a big way. The last game against the Bucks, 39 points, 7 3-pointers. I underestimated them, guys. Like, I think the Cavs are my number 2 team out east. I thought the Knicks were clearly going to be the number 2 team. And it's close between them. I want to be clear about that. But I don't think the Knicks can do what the Cavs do defensively night to night. And I like their depth more this year, too. I was sleeping. I apologize, Dean Wade. Dean Wade is kind of a baller, guys. Karis LeVert off the bench can serve you a cool 20 whenever he needs to. Okoro is a good supporting piece off the bench. I love me some Ty Jerome. I have always loved Ty Jerome. I love what he gives this bench. He's not the most impactful guy, but he can make some good passes and hold up defensively. I just trust their defense and their depth more than the Knicks. And the reason I favor them over the Warriors, I'm impressed by their depth and all the pieces that they have. I just feel like the Warriors are a little small, and that can come back to get them. Looney and TJD are their tallest guys in the rotation at 6'9". I just feel like against bigger teams out west, that could get them. Like you guys said, they play fast, and I think that's how Golden State needs to play to win games. And this has been an impressive stretch without Steph, but I feel like the more jumbo-sized out teams in the West could just big body them in some playoff series. And that's why I'm hesitant to consider the Warriors a real contender.
I've been very impressed by both these teams, but I'm with you, Logan. I think that Cleveland is the more legit contender. And you touched on a lot of the reasons that I feel that way. The Mobley leap is a big deal. And I understand if you haven't watched the Cavs a ton and you're looking at the box score and you're saying, okay, what? He's averaging 17.5 points per game compared to 15 points per game. Like, what's the big whoop there? He's being utilized in a totally different way in this offense. Logan mentioned how empowered he's been as a grab and go guy, pushing in transition. He is now running pick and roll, running inverted pick and roll, and has been effective there. He's driving twice as much per game. So there's just a different level of comfort and confidence we're seeing from him as a ball handler, as a driver, as a creator in this offense that I was always optimistic he'd develop as a prospect. I loved Evan Mobley as a prospect. He was my favorite guy, not just in that class, but in the past handful of drafts. But he just hadn't developed at the rate that I was hoping offensively through 3 years. And now we're seeing it. And he's not an offensive star, but he's a really good offensive player. And the significance of that does go past the box score. When you just have another legitimate threat on the floor, when you are playing these two big looks, and now you have a guy who actually can beat you from the 3-point line, right? Mobley's not going to jack up 4 or 5 threes a game, but he's been willingly taking a couple a night, and he's been making them at a solid clip. And he's also been much more willing to attack closeouts, right? So you have to at least respect him out to the 3-point line, and then he can put the ball on the floor and do some damage. That's always been the biggest question with the Cavs, is just, can they put together a legitimately good offense? I do not think that Evan Mobley single-handedly solves that, but I do think that he helps a good bit. And I think when you pair that with the fact that they are now starting the best shooting wing that they've had, certainly the best combination of both shooting and defense in Dean Wade, that makes this offense better. The difference between him and Isaac Okoro, who was 26% from deep on low volume in the playoffs, is big. And then when you add that Garland,
do you think he starts
over
Strus when Strus comes back?
I think Strus is also a good combination of shooting and defense, but I would probably go with Dean. I think that Dean is the better defensive player. I think that his switchability is so valuable. But I think either way, that's not a bad option. And I think that your depth is better with those guys out there healthy. I just particularly have an issue with Okoro starting as he did a lot last year because of his offensive limitations. But I would keep starting Dean Wade. I think he's really good. But so then you add that in, you add the Mobley leap, you add that Garland is playing better offensively. And I always loved Garland, but I was super discouraged by last year's playoff run and just how passive he was, how much he was struggling. He looks much more confident after an offseason getting his body right. So like there's a lot of pieces coming together for Cleveland here. They're second in offensive rating right now, and I do not expect that to hold up. And in a contending context, that is still my concern, is what is their real ceiling offensively? And also their wing play isn't great, right? Shout out Dean Wade, shout out Max Strus. They have solid wings, but compared to some of the other teams who we're looking at, they still aren't stacked at the position group. But they look way better than last year. And I think that they clearly have the defensive ceiling. I think that now they have a bigger offensive punch to throw. I mean, their backcourt offensively is phenomenal. And we know what Donovan Mitchell can do in these playoff environments where he can play like a top 15 sort of player. But now the burden isn't quite the same on him to have to put up 25 shots a night because there is more skill around him offensively. So, Logan, you're talking about comparing them to the Knicks. I'm going to hold out before I make any declarations on that in terms of the postseason. But I think the Cavs are like your prototypical great regular season team with what they do defensively. And I do expect them to get that 2 seed. I just think fundamentally they're more talented than the Warriors. But I do love the Warriors' depth. I love their depth. It's ridiculous, right? I was at the first Pelicans game without Steph, and Lindy Waters just emerges in that game as like a legitimate NBA rotation player. They just have these dudes popping up out of nowhere. And Melton was a good ad. Kyle Anderson was a good ad. Buddy, phenomenal ad. And that's the last aspect that I really like about this Warriors team. is the 3-point shooting. I mean, they got a lot of dudes who can really shoot out there with Buddy, with Lindy Waters playing more. Pods is going to shoot much better than he has early in the year, and I'm just a believer in Pods, and I'm with you. Kuminga going to the bench is a big deal, so I'm not underestimating the Warriors at this point. I underestimated them before the year. I thought they were a play-in team. I think this team can win 50 games right now, and the crazy stat last year was with Steph on the floor, they were still an 82nd percentile offense, and the skill around him is clearly better this year, and Draymond is one of those great defensive anchors, and the team is totally bought in on that end. The Warriors are really good, but I do still worry about some of the size stuff against big teams. I do still worry about the lack of a real second shot creator, even though I think Buddy is playing out of his mind offensively right now. That's the thing that we've seen bite the Warriors a lot on the offensive end in recent years, and that does still concern me a little bit. And the shooting has been really good, but sometimes when you go with those Draymond, TJD lineups, you just want a little more offensive skill on the floor. I think I just have more red flags about the Warriors still, but they've been a joy to watch. And anytime that you put a good team around Steph Curry, that makes me happy to see, because I was very, very discouraged about where they were at after last year. And I think that they've really been impressive.
So I think I actually disagree with both of you guys on this one. And the main reason why is I'm looking through everything through the context of Oklahoma City and Boston. So like, if we agree that Boston and Oklahoma City are kind of head and shoulders above everybody else, and that they essentially represent the hurdles that anybody has to overcome in order to get out of their conference or to win the title, then I'm looking through things through the context of beating those specific teams. Now, that it gets complicated because you probably have to deal with different matchups on your way there. And neither Oklahoma City or Boston are particularly large on the front line in ways that could give Golden State issues or things along those lines, right? So like it's complicated. But the reason why I would say that I trust Golden State a little bit more is I specifically am interested in the way that their defense can match up with both Oklahoma City's offense and Boston's offense. Like, I'm super excited to watch tonight's game between Golden State and Boston. For the record, I think Boston will win. I think Steph's coming back from an injury. I think he's still even on a little bit of a minutes restriction. I don't know if they have the firepower. Boston is also extremely emotionally motivated to win that game after their kind of perceived slight surrounding the Team USA situation this summer. So like, I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win, but I am really curious just to see how they guard. I think Steve's going to go in there and switch damn near everything and try to contain the ball and try to not overhelp and to try to force these guys to play one-on-one most of the night. And I'm just really curious to see how that looks, because again, like when I look at Cleveland and I imagine them running into I imagine them running into a team like Boston in a playoff series. They have such a unique gift, just like they did with Dallas in the finals last year. They are uniquely equipped to consistently expose your weak point on defense because of their depth of offensive initiation. They have so many different ways that they can initiate offense. And so, like, I do worry about Garland guarding in space. I do worry about teams picking on, if they think, oh yeah, Dean Wade, really solid defender, but, maybe we can get dribble penetration on him if we go this way or that way. Donovan Mitchell's a guy too that like competes. He's physical, can apply a little bit of ball pressure, but historically not necessarily the best defensive player in the world when things are flying around, even though I think he had a really good defensive season last year. The point being there's just more entry points for Boston to get Cleveland into rotation. And then it becomes a simple question of like, do I think that Cleveland could ever hope to keep up with Boston offensively? And the answer is no. And when it comes to Golden State, like I just envision them as a team against both Oklahoma City and Boston as a team that can play at least four good defensive players at all times. Steph Curry is, he has been attacked a lot over the course of his career, and it's become something that teams do a ton. I'd like last summer, I went back and watched the Lakers series. They were going at Steph literally every single time down the floor. It's a big part of how teams look to attack the Golden State Warriors. But at the same time, they can anchor him with four really good defensive players that are switchable, that can cover a ton of ground, that sort of thing. And so I look at them as a team that I think just matches up better defensively with those two teams. Now, to be clear, in order for Golden State to make any sort of real noise, I think one, Steph has to return to at least close to what he was when he was in his prime, which he has not shown since the middle of last season. And then two, I think that they do need to hit on a consolidation trade, something that shrinks their rotation from having 13 playable guys to maybe 10 or 11, but you have an upgrade at backup center, or you have a forward that can really score the ball. And by the way, this is the year for that, between Brandon Ingram being a guy that could be available, between Jeremy Grant being a guy that could be available, between Zach LaVine being a guy that could be available. Like, there are just a lot of guys that could be available this year at the 3-4 spot as someone who's like reliably capable of scoring 20 plus points a game efficiently. And so I think like, if on a real basic level, I just don't think Cleveland is capable of beating Boston. Like, I think there's like almost no pathway to victory there. Whereas with Golden State, I can kind of see like switching, containing, forcing turnovers, stagnating them. Oh, they hit on a couple deals too, so they've got a little bit more firepower. And Steph Curry just kind of, mentally dominates the series the way that he did in 2022. But again, to be clear, I would not pick either of those teams against Boston or Oklahoma City. I think they're on a separate tier. But if I had to pick between the two of them, I think Golden State kind of has a unique build that could challenge those two teams. Moving on to our biggest disappointment. So the two biggest disappointments to start the NBA season have been the Bucks and the Nuggets. The Nuggets are 4-3, but they've lost to every good team they've played. And they barely scraped together 3 wins against 2 against Toronto and 1 against Brooklyn. So they've looked really bad to start the year. And then obviously the Bucks have been a complete and total dumpster fire. And there's a good chance here that because they play the Jazz next, but then they play the Knicks and the Celtics, there's a decent chance here we're looking at a 2-8 Bucks team here in about a week. And so it's been really ugly. Which of those two teams, Carson, do you think is more likely to figure things out and end up winning multiple playoff series?
Absolutely Denver. And I get people lumping these two teams together as like, whoa, super disappointing, concerning.
Old
and they
and
have
slow.
both been disappointing. Yeah, they both struggled. But I think that what's going on in Milwaukee is more concerning unequivocally and more permanent to me. I just think that their defense is irreparably broken. And that was the case last year. And I think that remains the case this year. I'm not worried about the offense with Milwaukee. Their offense was great last year. You swap out Malik Beasley for Gary Trent Jr., right? You still got elite spot up shooting there. You have Dame and Giannis, and you get Chris Middleton on the floor. Super skilled offensive group. I'm not sure they can be a top 20 defense, though. And that is bad. And you have zero hope of contending if that is the case. They are just embarrassingly unathletic around Giannis, and they're embarrassingly unfocused around Giannis. The point of attack defense is a complete disaster. We knew that was the case. I thought we might see marginal improvement, getting Gary Trent Jr. in there and getting DeLon Wright some bench minutes, but hasn't looked better at all. And I just think these defensive problems are endemic to them now. Nothing has gotten better from last year for Milwaukee. This is who they are. And I thought we might see some slight improvement on that end. And then I was optimistic about a bit of a Dame bounce back. And I think that we're seeing a bit of a Dame bounce back. That just doesn't matter. You can have this overwhelming duo if you are this bad and this unserious on the defensive end and this poorly coached, by the way. I'm not worried about the offense, but there are still these stretches just in terms of the offensive direction where they feel aimless and they feel a bit disjointed. I'm just out on Milwaukee. I thought that they would be a little bit better than last year. They were still my 4th team in the East, but now you hold them up against a Cleveland. I take Cleveland. You hold them up against maybe a healthy Orlando. Like, I don't want to undersell that things will get better. Of course, they are missing one of their best players, and they do have Dame and Giannis. But this is a permanent major problem that they have that I don't think is getting better. On the flip side with Denver, yes, there are some things that aren't going to get better. The biggest one being the bench, unless they make a move, unless they're able to add a bench shooter. But clearly that unit has struggled mightily. The backup center situation is disastrous. There's a clear lack of shooting in the second unit. And Russ, who's now been starting the last couple games with Jamal Murray hurt, but he was brutal early in the year. And he's had a couple nice games, but he's still shooting 29% on the year, right? And there's been some catastrophic decision-making from him. I do think that he's going to play better, though. I think that he's a clear upgrade from Reggie Jackson last year, just with what he brings athletically, what he can do defensively, what he can do pushing the tempo in transition and playmaking. The bench will remain bad, but as I have said countless times this year now, Denver's bench was bad last year. Denver's bench has been consistently bad in the Jokic era, with the exception of the title team, right? Because they had Bruce Brown and Christian Brown was able to step up a bit in that run. It still wasn't a very good bench, though. Like, that's always been a struggle for them. The strength of this team has always been, will always be, having the best player on the planet and having an elite starting five. And although I think that KCP is better than Christian Brown, and I think he brings one specifically important thing for this offense, which is one of the lowest volume three-point shooting teams in basketball, which was that he could reliably step into 5 threes a game and make 40% of them. Christian Brown shooting the ball efficiently this year, but he's attempting under 3 threes a night and just effectively for spacing. It's not the same impact. We know that he's getting more confident, but he is still more hesitant to take those shots. But I think Christian Brown is a dog. I mean, I think he's a really good basketball player. It's just that one aspect, the shooting, that is a question mark, but athletically, defensively, in transition, as a cutter, as a rebounder for his size, like, the dude just makes impact plays. So then you look at some of the other causes of their early season struggles, and it's like they've been pretty unserious on the defensive end, right? They haven't been engaged there. Do I think that that is permanently the case for Denver? No. We saw the level they defended at in the title run. We saw them put together a top 10 defense last year. I don't think KCP to Christian Brown is a significant downgrade on the defensive end. They've just been unfocused and they've been lazy on the defensive end. I think that that is going to get better. Jamal Murray, horrible so far this year, and now he's hurt. I understand that he's been struggling for a good chunk of a calendar year now, and that the playoffs were horrible and the Olympics were horrible. I still think he's going to bounce back. And for the playoffs and the Olympics, I do think the calf injury was a significant factor there. I think we're going to get a better version of Jamal Murray as this year goes on. So it's like last game, they have to play without Aaron Gordon, right? He gets hurt just a few minutes into it. MPJ was really struggling early in the year. He's now playing a good bit better. But I believe in that starting five. I love their offensive formula. I think that the Jamal Jokic two-man game is still the best in basketball. I think Aaron Gordon is a phenomenal fit in this offense in the dunker spot. MPJ is an elite spot-up shooter. Christian Brown is good enough offensively to still make this an elite offense. And just don't underestimate Nikola Jokic, man. Is kind of all I can say. He's giving you 30, 13, and 10 out there on 65% true shooting. His three ball has come back, which is big because that was a question throughout the home stretch of last year. And I still think that that is just an unrivaled weapon that no team has an answer for. So as we talked about earlier, OKC has separated from Denver. Nobody else has, though. And I've seen a lot of ringing the alarm bells and panicking with Denver and saying this team is going to be scrapping to make it into the playoffs, which I understand because every game has been so ugly. But I think this team is going to look significantly better. I still think it's a great starting five. And look around, like, has Minnesota really impressed you? Has Dallas really impressed you, right? These other teams who you would have thought were in the mix, have they ascended past Denver? Not in my eyes. I'm going to bet on the formula with that starting five. I'm going to bet on the formula with Nikola Jokic. And I think that they have a good bit more room for improvement to look better than Milwaukee does.
Shocker, the pro Jokic guy gives a pro Jokic take, man. I'm
just
so surprised. I think the Nuggets are flawed as well, and I think the game that really hammered it home to me was the Nets game. We talked about this a little bit on our show, Carson, but watching Cam Thomas and Dennis Schroeder just attack Jamal Murray in crunch time, like, that's my biggest area of concern with the Nuggets, is just you can only put Christian Brown on one guy, and I really worry about them containing dribble penetration and just holding up defensively. But not to not to pile on, but Nikola Jokic did carry a team to the second round in 2021, flanked by Facundo Campazzo and Austin Rivers. So if there is a guy that I'm going to bank on, going further with his supporting cast underperforming, it would be Nikola Jokic. And I do think the Bucks are a dumpster fire. I found this stat on Twitter. The Bucks have started 1-6. Of teams that have started 1-6 in a season, that's 150 NBA teams since 1970. Just 12 of them made the playoffs. 5 of them had a losing record, and none of those teams won more than 47 games. So the Bucks are fighting an uphill battle against a pretty significant historical precedent. And you look at these last two losses against Cleveland, man, back-to-back losses, you lose by 3 combined points. It feels like almost like a turning point for the Bucks in this season, right? If they come out on the other side of those games, those are decided by a few possessions, 3 total points. One shot goes the other way on both sides, and the Bucks could have won both of those games. They're just demoralizing. You've just got to feel so beat down after those games. Damian Lillard gives you 36 and 41 in both of those games, and you come up short. Carson, I can't remember how you phrased it, but I also wrote down this team is impressively unathletic. Like, it's kind of funny. And Jayson, you talk about earlier in the show how the game has shifted to these speedy teams, these athletic teams that play fast, that play upbeat games, that keep you in games. The Bucks almost feel like a dinosaur in that way. In 4 years, their style of playing basketball in a way has almost gone extinct. Like, they just can't win like this. Brook Lopez is completely immobile. He's a shell of himself. You got AJ Green defending Darius Garland in crunch time. Ironically, AJ Green might be their best perimeter defender, guys. That's a problem. Like, you talk about the late game, like, miscommunications. Dude, there's one bucket in that game where, I can't remember, somebody sets a screen on AJ Green. Damian Lillard does not even shift over to switch, and they give Darius Garland a free lane to the hoop for a free layup. It's like, there's defensive personnel limitations, obviously, but this is a team that's poorly coached, that is just not equipped to win games right now. The depth is horrible. And I understand that Chris Middleton is out, right? I think that's what, I guess, Bucks fans would push back with. Oh, well, Chris Middleton isn't out there. Chris Middleton can come back and help you win some games, but he doesn't fix all of the problems that are here in Milwaukee. Yeah, I'm out on Milwaukee. I've been out on Milwaukee since they hired Doc Rivers. He's 20 and 30 as a head coach. Adrian Griffin was 30 and 13. Don't get me wrong, man. If Adrian Griffin was out here, I don't think that makes any bit of a difference. But they're poorly coached. This is a bad roster. And yeah, as you're talking about with this stylistical change in basketball now, Jayson, this shift to a different methodology of winning games, I think the Bucks are extinct. They just feel like a relic of a bygone era.
Yeah, I would blame the coaching staff for a good portion of Milwaukee's issues right now. The defensive personnel stuff is real, but I've seen bad defenses, or I should clarify. I've seen teams that have bad defensive personnel put together coherent defenses through attention to detail and accountability. And that's the main thing. Like you talked about the driving layup that Darius Garland had on that screening action. You could put together a low light reel that is over an hour long to this point of the season on like just comical defensive breakdowns from the Milwaukee Bucks, even including good players. I think Brook Lopez is having a bad defensive season. I think Giannis is having a bad defensive season. DeLon Wright is a professional defender. The dude's got like a low light reel of him making mistakes and losing guys off the dribble. Like Gary Trent Jr. was legitimately a better, even with his limitations, and he's not a good perimeter defender, but he was better than Malik Beasley. Mm-hmm. And he hasn't been good to start this year. And so I think the coaching staff plays a significant role in it. I think for the purposes of the question, which team do I think is more likely to figure it out and win multiple playoff series? I think I'd probably lean towards Milwaukee just simply because the East is so bad. And so like there's a better chance of them like catching a pretty flawed team in the first round and maybe beating them. And then who knows what happens in round 2. Whereas like Denver to me right now, I think they could be in a tough spot in the standings because of the way the West works. With Aaron Gordon being out for a while now, with Jamal Murray being hurt, with their issues on the bench, I think they're going to have a really hard time winning games over the next month or so. And if they go into December a few games below 500, it could be really, really difficult for them to get out of that like play-in picture. And that's where it starts to look like, okay, are they going to end up facing Oklahoma City or one of these higher powered Western Conference teams in the first round where that could be an issue? Whereas like Milwaukee could end up catching somebody that's a little more beatable in the first round. And so to be clear, I think Denver's a better basketball team than Milwaukee. I think I I've never been as high on Giannis as everyone else is, but even with Giannis, like I I think that we're reaching a point in his career where he's not as incredibly impactful on the defensive end as he used to be. And I still, on the offensive end, I just think that he's not at the same level as some of these top guys in terms of really picking defenses apart in the half court. Again, Giannis is still a top 5 player. I'm not trying to say that he doesn't bring that impact, but like, I just think Denver's better. I think Jokic is better. I think that their starting lineup is better. I think they're more well coached. I would take Mike Malone over Doc Rivers any day of the week.
Yeah.
So like, but just for the purposes of the question, I'm really worried that Denver's going to be on the road in the first round against a really good team and that they could be looking at a first round exit here. But then again, you could also talk me into the Bucks missing the playoffs entirely with how ugly things are going. So
the injury point is a good one with Denver, though, because this is one of the teams that's least equipped in all of basketball to handle injuries to 2 of their starters, right? Like that's the entire formula. And if you're without both those dudes for multiple weeks, that's a problem. Like we saw some good stuff from the young guys in their last game. Julian Strawther was impressive. Peyton Watson was good. He was actually able to make a 3, which is everything for him. If he could
a big
do that.
3.
Big 3, wide open, but big 3, like high pressure. Yeah. If he could do that, he'd be a hell of a role player. It's just, unfortunately, I don't think that he can with any sort of consistency. And it's tough because, like, I feel like the Nuggets were starting to figure out some stuff with the bench stagger, right? Playing MPJ more with the second unit and even playing Jokic with, like, sort of a mixed group. But, like, when Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray are both out, you just need a Jokic superhero performance every night, which I do think is possible, but that is true in terms of the seeding. Like, I think a lot of people overreacted in terms of panic to the early stretch of the year because, like, Jokic just gets you to win 50 games, right? That's what he did in 2021. That's the pace they were on in 2022 when he was on the floor. But the depth is not something you want to be tested like this in Denver.
Mm-hmm. And the depth of the conference is greater than ever at this point. Like, I mean, like Houston's just a pain in the butt. I don't think Houston's winning a playoff series, but they're a pain in the butt. Mm-hmm. Like San Antonio is scrappy just because of Victor Wembanyama starting to get it figured out, and he's just such a good defensive player. Like everyone is just scrappy. The Clippers are not an easy game. Like the Clippers, it's like they're going to defend like crazy, and James Harden's going to keep them close, and who knows what'll happen at the end, right? Like they've been in almost every game this year. So like, yeah, it's just tricky. But again, like for the purposes of the question, though, like the Eastern Conference just has so many cupcake opponents. I wouldn't be surprised if Milwaukee gains some momentum and finds themselves in like a 4, 5, 6 seed and finds themselves with an achievable first round matchup. All right, let's move on to our next question. And we'll start with you, Carson, on this one, or excuse me, with Logan on this one. Who is more likely to make a deep playoff run this year, the Dallas Mavericks or the Los Angeles Lakers?
I'm going to take the Mavericks. I like the Lakers a good bit more than I did last year, and it starts with the coaching. Like, I just like JJ Redick so much more than Darvin Ham. Like, just the little stuff in their offense, man. Like the deliberate offensive actions that the Lakers are running late into games. I can't remember which one it was the other day, but they dumped the ball to LeBron on the left wing in like a post-up sort of situation. And Anthony Davis sets a pin down screen for Austin Reeves to run off of for an easy cut to the bucket and basket. And it's like, oh my gosh, who knew that using 3 players in a play could create could manufacture an easy look? What an idea. There's so many more deliberate and like nuance. There's so much more like deliberate actions to the offense and nuance to it that I like more. I love Dalton Connect. That dude is a freaking bucket. Like, real quick as an aside, before I get deeper into this, do you guys think Dalton Connect with like enough minutes, could he be like a 20-point per game scorer? Is that ludicrous to say?
Enough minutes for the Washington Wizards, maybe.
All right, okay.
Yeah, he'll feed him. I think Dalton could average 20 in the NBA. I think he's a professional scorer. I think that he's a long way from being like good enough to do that on a good team, though.
True. I think I agree with that. But that guy is just wired to get buckets, man. Like he's such a good addition to this team. But my issue isn't really with the offense here in LA. I think the offense is going to be good. Anthony Davis has been having a phenomenal year this year, but it's more to do with the Herculean task that Anthony Davis has of being a one-man defense here. I think that having D'Lo and Reeves as your point of attack guards defensively is a problem. I don't think Hachimura
Those
is a
boys
really
have
good
been getting
defender.
absolutely fried to start the year.
It's really rough. And so asking him to overcome that is a big ask. And, Dallas is in a similar boat, like when you have Kyrie and Luka and Clay, right? But it's not as bad. But when you have 48 minutes of quality, center play from Gafford and Lively, they can make up for a defense. When you have a PJ Washington, when you have a Najee Marshall, right? So it's close between these two teams. The thing that puts the Mavericks over the top to me is two things. And that's one, it's Luka Doncic. I think he's the best player on either of these two teams. I just trust him to go superhuman when his team needs him. The guy's just a gamer. In the big moments, I trust him more than anybody on these two teams. Actually, with LeBron, I don't know if I can still say. I know LeBron can crank it up when they needs to, but Luka's special. And then it is the introduction of Klay Thompson. Like the fact that he brings this offense up another level than it even was last year, right? Luka and Kyrie could go crazy and take turns passing the baton between one another in the playoffs last year. But Klay just gives them a more steadying presence, a guy that can knock down shots at a high level, that is going to get force-fed really easy looks. And he just knows how to move within the flow of the offense. He's such a big addition to them. So it is close between these two teams, but to me, it's the defensive gap. I just trust Dallas's defense a little more. I think LA just has two glaring liabilities in their defense. And then it is the introduction of Klay Thompson. So it's really close between these two teams, but I think I would take Dallas.
I also think it's close. I would also take Dallas, though. Both these teams have a lot of offensive firepower. I'm with you, Logan, on the Lakers offense under JJ Redick. I think it's awesome. I think the level that Anthony Davis is playing at offensively is outstanding. And I do think that their offensive supporting cast is and always has been good, right? The fact that D'Lo and Rui shit themselves in the playoffs last year is not characteristic of the level of offensive players they are. I get that D'Lo's done it in back-to-back postseasons now, but like he was also a really, really good regular season offensive player last year. He's frustrating, but he is skilled and he's better than what he was.
And Rui was really good 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think Rui's just a really good complementary offensive piece. It was crazy to me how awful he was against Denver last year. And both these teams have two bona fide stars. In LA's case, superstars, right? I get that LeBron isn't playing at that level right now, but come
he starts every year like this.
Yeah, I think that he's going to get there, right? It's LeBron James. We've seen what he's done in basically every high-stakes situation, every playoff series. We know that he can get to that level. So there's definitely some similarities in terms of the strengths. I just think I trust Dallas's defense and depth a bit more. I think both these teams have their issues at the point of attack. I think it is significantly worse with LA. I mean, Logan, you mentioned what you have with Reeves and D'Lo, right, being your primary point of attack defenders, but Rui is rough defensively. And the entire Lakers transition defense is just such a disaster. The entire defense around Anthony Davis is just really, really rough. And like, it's not surprising that they're bad in transition because they have been for years, but like, it's brutal nonetheless. And all those limitations around AD aren't going anywhere unless they make a move. And I know that everybody says, well, Vando comes back. He's still like unplayable offensively. I don't know. I just don't think that that's like the ace in the hole that some people think it is. And so although I do have some concerns about Dallas's point of attack defense, they do have a Najee Marshall who you can deploy for 25 minutes a night, who's a really good all-around role player and a really good perimeter defender. And they do have PJ and Gafford / Lively for 48 minutes in the front court. So you do have, to me, a better defensive front court. As much as I love AD, and LeBron will do his job as a low man in the playoffs, like, I still think what you're getting from Dallas is definitely more consistent defensively. You have Maxi Kleber, who you can put out there in your front court defensively. They just have more dudes there. And I have been underwhelmed with the Lakers bench. I looked at it on paper before the year, and I was okay with it. I love Dalton Knecht. I thought that he was the most polished scorer in this draft, and I think you've immediately seen that value from him. But I was more optimistic about Max Christie in terms of what he could bring as a two-way player. He's really struggled offensively. Gabe Vincent has really struggled offensively. I think he'll get better, right? We know what he is. He's a solid bench point guard. Jackson Hayes has actually probably been a little better than I expected, but I just don't think that he's that good at the end of the day. So I've been underwhelmed with the bench. I do think it's possible that you just get a dominant AD series and LeBron steps it up and the shooting is on fire and LA can go on a run. But I think Dallas's formula is a bit more dependable because they're more serious defensively. And now that offense with Clay is significantly more serious to me than it was last year, right? They really rode their defense on that run to the finals in a lot of ways. And the spot up shooting was so questionable. Clay alone is such a massive upgrade from what you were getting on the wings for Dallas last year. I don't think that they were your typical finals caliber team last year. So, like, I do think it's important to put that in perspective because if I think they're a little better than last year, that doesn't mean that I think that they're like emerging as a juggernaut now. I just think they're really good, and I do prefer them to LA a bit.
Yeah, we're in lockstep on this one. I think the Mavericks are definitely more likely to make a deep playoff run. You can talk yourself in or out of both of these teams. They both have the exact same weakness, in my opinion, which is they're slow on the perimeter. I think losing Derrick Jones Jr. and losing Josh Green were substantial losses in terms of like the speed, the ability to cover ground. Najee Marshall is a good point of attack defender. He's a decent athlete, but he's not like a fly around crazy athlete. Like I think Josh Green was a better athlete than him. So and Pacers game, perfect example. The Pacers just ran circles around him in that game in transition and in the half court to get to whatever they want. I think you can talk yourself into massive upside with both teams. Like Dallas, just all you really have to do is follow the formula from last year and kind of talk about all of the offensive upside that comes from incorporating Klay Thompson. They have added some more 5-out concepts this year, although they're not using them as much as I'd like to. There's been a little bit of they do this a lot when Luka's on the bench, where they'll basically start running that cross action, where basically they'll have lively catch at the top of the key, and they'll have the two guards screen for each other, and then cut off of it, and then if they don't get anything out of it, they'll flow into DHOs out of that, which is a 5-out concept that I've seen some good stuff, but they just don't lean on it as much. They've kind of just fallen back into more or less what they've done last year, which is spamming high ball screen actions, whether it's stack or double drag or things along those lines. But like the main reason why I would lean Dallas over the Lakers is, one, I think Luka is better than everybody on the Lakers. For the record, Anthony Davis has played better than Luka to this point. Anthony Davis has played better than everybody in the league to this point, really, except for Jokic maybe. And he's hooping, but like, already starting to show some signs of him getting banged up a little bit. And the thing with AD is, like, I still think kind of like what we saw in the Cavs game is things kind of ramp up physically. He does have a tendency to be a little bit more inconsistent on the offensive end of the floor. So like, I'm not as high on him as I am on Luka. And then Dallas is just deeper. They have more good basketball players. You could argue about the starting lineup here or there. The Lakers do have a very good starting lineup, but like, the ability to have two legitimate fives that can anchor significant portions of the game. I mean, they really have a third 5 too with Kleba if they want to go smaller. If you call Kleba your backup 4, PJ Washington and Maxi Kleba is a better 4-man rotation than like Rui and Vando, for instance, if you're looking past the stars, although obviously LeBron James is a factor there. The Klay Thompson piece, like, there's no doubt that he's not the athlete that Derrick Jones was, and his ability to cover ground in transition and rotation is not the same, but he's just so much better offensively that you could talk me into a give and take there where it's more or less the same. So, like, do I think Dallas is as good as Maverick fans think that the Mavs are like a top tier contender? Do I agree with that? No, I'm with you, Carson. I think they were a team that broke through the conference last year, but I didn't view them as a team that was on the same tier as Boston. I picked Boston in that series, and I picked Boston to blow them out, and they did. But that said, like, when I look past the top tier and I look at the rest of the Western Conference, to me, there's not a team. Like Denver is a weird one, like we talked about earlier with their weird start. But going into the season beneath Denver and Oklahoma City, to me, Dallas was clearly better than Phoenix, clearly better than the Lakers, clearly better than Minnesota, clearly better than the teams that are in that like kind of middle tier in the conference. I think it'll remain to be seen whether or not they kind of hit an even higher offensive ceiling in the large sample. I'm hoping that in time they continue to explore some of the ball and player movement stuff that they did in the early part of the season. But I certainly think that they're more likely to make a deep playoff run than the Lakers. On the Lakers front, this is all I'll say. Like, if you would have told me coming into the season, oh, they're 4-3 with their tough schedule that they played to start, I would have been thrilled. I'd have been like, that's amazing. Obviously, it's manifested different than I would have expected. I would have expected them to drop one of those first 3 games, and I would have expected them to beat the Pistons, right? But like, they're 4-3, they're sitting in a good spot. But I'm actually coming out of it lower on them than I was to start the season. And the main reason why is just my overarching philosophy on the game that has shifted a little bit in the early part of the season in terms of my prioritization of perimeter speed. And the fact that I just think the Lakers are really slow. They desperately needed Max Christie to pop. He's been bad. He does not understand and accept who he is as a basketball player. What he is as a basketball player is a guy who should take catch and shoot threes and maybe one dribble decisions, meaning whether it's a slash to the bucket or a quick drive and kick. But he thinks he should run action. He puts the ball on the floor multiple times and over penetrates and tries to dunk on everybody. And he just, for lack of a better term, he's an incredibly immature offensive basketball player. And so I don't think like I'm not a big Cam Reddish fan, but with how bad Max has looked, I almost think you have to play Cam over him. They needed Vando to get healthy. I'm higher on Vando offensively than you are, Carson, just because the last time we saw him with the Lakers, they weren't running this offense. They were sticking him in the corner. That's obviously going to be a very poor way to use him. But if they use him as a screener and as a roller and as a cutter like they did before he got hurt last year, I actually think he's less of a negative on the offensive end of the floor, and he brings the desperately needed perimeter athleticism that they need.
Yeah.
But he's been hurt, and he's not been able to stay on the floor for any extended stretch for a very long time. So, like, as I look at the Lakers roster, and it's like, okay, Gabe is somewhat fast, but he's really small, and the dude literally cannot put the ball in the basket. It's the craziest thing. Like, he just cannot score. Then Max, who is an incredibly immature offensive player, and Vando, who can't stay healthy. Those are your fast guys. That's the speed on this roster. So, like, that's where I really start to get concerned about them in the big picture. The one thing with the Lakers is they have multiple expiring deals. D'Lo's deal is expiring. Now the Jalen Hood-Schifino deal is expiring. So they have an opportunity to potentially make a deal, and they have draft compensation that they can use, but they need to like absolutely nail whatever deadline deals that they make. And there's a lot of talk about them looking for a backup center. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to have an upgrade of Jackson Hayes, but he's so far down on their list of problems right now with their issues on the perimeter. I also think that they'll play better. This is the last thing I'll say. I also think they'll play like the Lakers are 4-3 against a really tough schedule to start, and a lot of their guys aren't playing well. Austin's been really good in some games, but he's been really bad in some games. I thought the Pistons game was the worst defensive game of his career. Rui Hachimura has been really good some games, really bad some games. LeBron James, for the most part, has been down to start the year. Nobody on the bench is playing well except for maybe Dalton. And even then, I think it's been some mixed results. So, like, they have a lot of guys not really playing well right now. So, like, I do think that the Lakers will get better. I think that they're going to be a good regular season team. Like, I think through 15 games, they'll be 10-5, maybe even 11-4. We'll see. Like, I think they're going to be fine. It's just in terms of their big picture goals and what they want to achieve, I think this roster is deeply flawed, and I have some concerns for them. We're over an hour, so I want to get moving to this last topic. Really wanted to spend some time on the Phoenix Suns today. So let's get into this. A little bit different Phoenix Suns team than we saw last year. They're 16th in offense, 6th in defense, 8th in net rating. Couple of big differences. Last year, they were 14th in assist percentage. Only 64% of their baskets were assisted. This year, they're up to 5th. 69% of their baskets have been assisted to start this year. A lot more driving kick. Their three-point volume is way up. They're contending better physically. Last year, they were 20th in defensive rebounding. This year, they're 6th. Cleaning the Glass has a stat they use to track transition defense called points added per 100 possessions. It's basically a combination of frequency and efficiency with transition. Last year, they were 18th. This year, they're 5th. So they're contending better in the physical parts of the game. Big part of that is Ryan Dunn. Have you guys seen, we'll start with you, Carson. Have you seen anything with the Phoenix Suns that leads you to believe they're a different team that will be more successful this year than they were last year?
Yeah, I do think that they're better than last year. And the biggest reason for that in my eyes is that they've found a couple of two-way role players. That was the struggle all of last season, right? It was, all right, are we playing these guards who can actually shoot the ball but really struggle to defend? Or is it like, well, we got to put Josh Okogie out there because we know athletically he can hang. But like they didn't have dudes who were capable on both sides of the ball. And I think now they've got some wings who can really defend out there, playing more minutes, who have also been capable offensively. Ryan Dunn, to me, was the key to this season for the Suns. This is what I said in the preseason. They have to play him, and he has to be good, and he has to hold up an offensive level close to what we saw in preseason. I guess maybe I shouldn't even say that, because he was shooting like over 40% from deep on crazy volume, but he has to play at a level that solidifies that he has taken an offensive leap from the player we saw at Virginia, who was the worst offensive player drafted in the first round, probably, right? And a complete non-shooter who had no touch even from the free throw line. But what we saw in preseason, I thought, yeah, I think that something close to this is reasonable to expect from him. And I think that he's delivered on that. Last couple games, he hasn't made a shot, but like we've seen him have some really good offensive performances, and he was the best defensive prospect in this class. I mean, what he does athletically on the perimeter is outstanding. We've seen him throw at some premier perimeter players, if it's LeBron, if it's Harden, if it's Luka, and really hold his own in those matchups. He's also the best shot blocking wing in this class, and he's just exactly what Phoenix needs, right? They need athletes. They need defenders. And when those dudes can play offensively, like he's attempting 9.5 threes per 36 minutes, and he's making 36% of them. That's a huge win for them. That's the exact sort of role player they're looking for. And Royce O'Neal has been better this year. He's filling his role at a higher level. Obviously, they made the move for him mid-season last year, and he had a really bad season versus Minnesota, but he's shooting the ball really well, and he's defending well right now. So I think that they've addressed their biggest need in terms of role players. And when you get O'Neal out there, or you get Dunn out there instead of a Tyus Jones or a Bradley Beal, and you're playing them alongside Katie and Book, you've seen really good results. I think that their starting five as it's configured is not a good cohesive lineup. I think that they have some redundancies and some very obvious limitations there, but it's not like they're strictly playing their starting five 25 minutes a night, right? This isn't Denver. So they're getting some better role player contributions. Their offense, I think, is pretty similar to last year. I do think it's slightly better, right? I do think there's a bit of a stabilizing element with Tyus Jones. You mentioned the assist percentage. I do think the ball movement has been a bit better. I like the three-point volume going up. I do still think they have some of the same limitations. They are still dead last in the league in restricted area makes. And compared to the great offenses, they just don't have that sort of overwhelming advantage creator, right? They can get in the drive and kick game, and they have a lot of offensive skill out there, but that rim pressure aspect, just having a guy who every time down the floor gets you a great shot, is something they do not have. They do rely a lot still on Katie and Book being incredible shot makers, and Beal being a really good shot maker, and they can be a good offense like that. They've been average offensively so far this year, but they can be a good offense like that, and I expect them to be. It's just really hard to be a great offense like that, and hopefully they keep the three-point volume up, because that was another component of this last year, is they weren't getting shots at the rim, and they weren't getting a high percentage of shots from beyond the arc, and then you're just living in the mid-range, and that's just a numbers problem. That's a math problem for you, no matter how good your shot making from Katie and Book is. But what's been encouraging is how great they've been in the clutch compared to just the complete disaster they were last year, right? Turnover machine in clutch situations. They've been awesome. That's where they've been winning all their games. They're 5-0 in clutch games this year, and that's against a lot of good teams. Some of that is just KD heroics, but that's encouraging. I do think that they're better than last year, and to me, their ceiling is about how much they can continue to get these athletes and these defenders on the floor, because I think that that's where we need to see improvement from them compared to last year, is really on the defensive end. And in terms of physicality and toughness, I mean, they just got smacked in the mouth. They got bullied by Minnesota. The offense struggled, and we saw, again, the lack of rim pressure, right? The lack of high-end athleticism, advantage creation against a super athletic defense that was bringing a ton of pressure, and they were able to kind of suffocate even these really skilled ball handlers. But the defense is where I really hope to see improvement from Phoenix, and I think that we have seen some. Like I said, I don't like the actual starting five. I think that lineup struggles to defend. I think they struggle to rebound. I think it's silly that they promised Tyus Jones a starting spot, and if they were going to do that, I think that they probably should have sent Beal to the bench, just so, again, you are able to get a better athlete and defender on the floor. And I do think that having Nurk and Plumlee eating up all your center minutes does limit their defensive ceiling. They've improved, but it is tough when you have that sort of limitations at the most important defensive position. And alongside O'Neal or Dunn or whoever you're playing big minutes or starting, like you are still going to have a small guard in Tyus Jones or Bradley Beal. Book and KD are solid defensively, but we don't consistently see them buy all the way in on that end. Like, I think they have the potential to be a good offense. I think they have the potential to be an above average defense. And I also think that this West is a bit more vulnerable. Like the depth is crazy, but Minnesota's not as good as last year. Denver's not as good as last year. Dallas to me is clearly beatable. Like, I think that this Phoenix team can win a series in this West. They might be able to go further than that. They might be able to win 2 series. I'm not really seeing a gap between some of the teams and them where I did expect to see a gap. And early in the year, when a lot of teams out West have just underwhelmed, Phoenix has been the one team that's soaring. I mean, I think there's obviously a massive gap between OKC and them, but I do think they're better. I was low on how much they could really improve this offseason just with some of their fundamental core limitations and lack of roster flexibility. And I don't think that they've moved mountains in terms of how I viewed them, but it's definitely been encouraging. And I am higher on them now than I was preseason.
Yeah, I mean, that's the measuring stick for this year, right? It's all about, can the Suns win a playoff series? They got demolished by Minnesota. I have been encouraged, and it does start defensively. I think we've seen more buy-in with Coach Bud, and, Nurk and Plumlee have their, physical limitations as like centers, but I think they've played hard. Like, I'll give Nurk some props. Like, I've liked how Nurk's trying out there. He's like moving in the pick and roll. He's trying to contest shots, right? Like, obviously, there's limitations athletically with what he can do, but I've been impressed there. They're really good at turning defense into offense when they can get stops. This was the number 1 transition team in basketball last year. They're number 5 again this year. They have been better in the fourth quarter. They had that huge comeback win against Philadelphia. I blinked. I couldn't believe the Suns had come back and won that game. KD had 15 points in the fourth. They had that 21-point comeback versus the Clippers. So I do think you're seeing a feistier, a hungry team, a team that is, again, I hate always saying this, but they are playing harder. I think you are seeing that with Phoenix. They aren't melting down in the fourth. I think I'm higher on this offense a little bit more than you, though, Carson. It is because of that high volume of threes. This team was 25th in three-pointers attempted last year. They're 11th this year. They were 20th in three-pointers made last year. They're 7th right now. All of last year, the Suns had 23 games where they made 15 or more threes. That's just 28% of their games. This season, already, they've had 4 games where they've made 15 or more threes. That's 57% of their games. It's 4 of 7 thus far. And so they're on pace to do it in 47 games this year. If they can keep up that kind of three-point volume and playing hard defensively, it does make a meaningful difference in how this swings games. I agree with your fundamental flaw for this team, Carson. There's nobody that gets downhill and exerts a ton of pressure on the rim. But I think they can still be a really good offense with this kind of star power and this three-point shooting flanking them. They made 9 threes against Portland in the third quarter, and that just completely shut them. I get it, it's Portland, but they completely shut them down. That was something that last year's team wouldn't have done at all. And they've had individual games that they've survived their stars not playing well. And I think that bodes well for the playoffs as well. Against Philadelphia, Book goes 3 of 18. They mount that 21-point comeback against the Clippers without Bradley Beal on the floor at all. So they've got star power. They've got improved three-point shooting and depth. They've got improved defense with better coaching. I think this team can win a playoff series. I don't know if I'd take them to the Western Conference Finals. That's a little much, but I do think this team can win a playoff series. I've been really impressed by the Suns. I was really low on them like you coming into the year, but I do feel a little differently about them now.
I think it's been really funny to see some of the narrative stuff coming out of the way this team is covered. There's a lot of attributing Tyus Jones with the success of the team here in the early going, which is like doesn't make any sense to me. Statistically, they've been way better when he's been off the floor. Coming out of that series with Minnesota, the obsession with the idea of like them needing a point guard to me was silly. Because it's like, okay, you're losing because you're getting manhandled, not because you're because you don't have a point guard. And like, yeah, do Beal and Booker and KD need to handle ball pressure better and get the ball up the floor and get into their stuff. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. Like that's on them. But like being like looking at that situation and being like, okay, option one, we just do a better job not pissing down our leg when someone picks us up full court. And we devote our resources towards bigger athletes that help us win these really physical games. Or option two, let's have Tyus do it. You know, like it's confusing to me because like, you know, just look at their data. Like the guys that have been leading to the most success on the floor have been Royce O'Neal, Ryan Dunn, the guys that are big physical defenders that can knock down a wide open catch and shoot three. And like, look, do I love this team build? No, because like, I think it's really hard to win without a center in the NBA just because like size and physicality and the ability to defensive rebound is important. And the Suns have been negative in their centerless groups so far this season. But like right now, if I was like picking a lineup to go down with, if I was the Suns, it'd be Beal, Booker, KD, and it'd be Ryan Dunn, and it'd be Royce O'Neal. Those are the guys that I would want to go down with. Those are the guys that give them the best chance to compete physically. I think that's the encouraging part. Getting a full season of Royce O'Neal, adding Ryan Dunn to this group, I think that's what causes them to have a better defensive rebounding track record than they do this year, to have a better transition defense than they did last year, to be a better defense overall than they were last year. And like Ryan Dunn is like not just a good defensive player, like he's one of those guys where like I get nervous when people run action on his side of the floor that he's just going to blow it up. Like he like the dude is an absolute monster. I loved the quote from KD about there was a quote from KD that like one of the things he loves about Ryan Dunn is that he fouls a lot. And it's actually been really funny to me because like this is something I thought with my young players all the time, the ones that I coach. Like when I'm playing one-on-one with them, when I just decide to step in for fun and play king of the court, I'm like, why are you scared to guard me? Like, yeah, I get it. I'm your coach. I get it. I'm bigger and stronger than you, but like compete here. Show me what you got. And there have been a handful of guys that have come through the program where it's like they don't care that I'm older and bigger and stronger and more experienced. Like they try, they foul me, they get physical, and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. You're competing. You're showing fight. And like it's like I had a comment after the Russell Westbrook clip that I showed of him guarding RJ Barrett. Someone was like, he committed 3 fouls on that possession. I'm like, maybe. But you know what the best defenders do? They foul and they get away with it. That's like what they do. That's part of basketball. That you need to get the Suns needed to get meaner and more physical. And I feel like they're meaner and more physical this year. And I think that that's something that makes them better. I think when push comes to shove on the offensive end of the floor, it's on KD, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal to navigate ball pressure, to get the defense into rotation, to make the right reads, to trust each other, to drive and kick. I think that is, if we're looking for something that Coach Budenholzer has really affected, you know, Frank Vogel is as good of a defensive coach as he is, and I think he's an underrated defensive coach. Frank Vogel has always had been way behind the times on the offensive end of the floor. And I think that structure and that prioritization of those driving kick possessions has been really good for them. I'm with you, Carson, in your outlook on the league. Like, to me, Oklahoma City's on a clear tier above the rest, but you could talk me into any of those other teams winning multiple playoff series. So that could be Oklahoma City versus Phoenix. That could be Oklahoma City versus Dallas. It could be Oklahoma City versus Minnesota, Oklahoma City versus Denver, Oklahoma City versus the Lakers, Oklahoma City versus Golden State. Any of those teams, to me, I could see meeting in the conference finals just because there's just a whole... It's so funny because we were talking earlier about the difference between the two conferences and how there's only two teams over 500 out east right now. But it's like it's a whole lot of mediocre off the top. There's like 2 elite teams and then there's like 18 teams, you know what I mean? And like there are a couple of them that are playing better at the start of the season, right? Like Phoenix is playing better, Cleveland's playing better, Golden State's playing better. But like when push comes to shove and we get to April and it's time for a 7-game series, there's not really a whole lot of separation taking place among that group, in my opinion. And so to me, it's like what it comes down to is who can, among that group, who can from day one start a training camp, address the things they need to address and build those habits and all of that attention to detail so that they can be a sharper team when they get to the end of the line. And to me, Phoenix is one of those teams that's taking the right approach here in the early part of the season. All right, guys, that's all we have for today. Carson, why don't you tell us about what you guys are working on over at Nerd Sesh?
Yeah, we have a ton of stuff. So as Logan mentioned, I just did a video on Evan Mobley. yesterday. We do have a video out on Chet Holmgren from last week covering some of these early season breakouts. So that's fun. We really go in depth with film on those, but we also have all of our full length shows 3 times a week. We're talking basketball. So much fun to have it back. We're also talking football. So if you are looking for a fix there, then you can head on over to the Nerd Sesh YouTube channel. All that good stuff is there. And that's basically it. Thank you, Jayson, for having us on. As always, this was a great time. And I'm just so happy to have basketball back, man. It brings me so much joy. And this has been a really fun season so far, I think.
Hell yeah, I'm super excited too. I appreciate you guys taking the time to come on. I'm hoping that we finally get a good NBA Finals this year. That's the give me a good conference finals and a good NBA Finals. That's all I'm hoping for.
If OKC Boston doesn't deliver, then well, what's the point? What's it all for?
All right, guys. As always, we sincerely appreciate you for supporting the show. Make sure you head over to Nerd Sesh. They're making incredible content over there. You will get smarter, and you'll just enjoy those two guys and the hard work that they do. We will be back. I'm recording a mailbag after this that's going to air later this week. But we are going to be back tomorrow morning to cover a jam-packed Wednesday night slate. The Celtics Warriors game tonight should be super interesting. There's like a half dozen really good games. We're probably going to do something similar to what we did Tuesday, like bouncing around the whole league and doing a bunch of films. So be ready for that tomorrow. And then we'll have that mailbag on Friday, and then we'll be out of here for the week. All right, guys, that's all we have. We will see you tomorrow.